I'm going to have some guests coming up in just a few minutes with us on the program. I want to point out that Steve Millington is normally here with us on Tuesdays, and Randy Stapilus is going to be joining us in studio as well, who's normally here, of course, with us on Mondays. But we're going to have a bit of a combined attack, talking a little bit about presidential preferences coming up in a few minutes. Also, ahead on the program today, Grant Lobes and I have been emailing back and forth the last couple of weeks about topics for the 9 o'clock hour. And all of a sudden, the whole thing was thrown into pretty much a decision on Saturday with the death of Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia, who, if you didn't know this, Gallup did a poll. And, well, you're probably not surprised. 1/3 of Americans never heard of the justice. Apparently, they all thought that he was just one of the uncles on Real Housewives of New Jersey or something along those lines. And most Americans, when asked who is Antonin Scalia, huh? And this is even after he died. So a lot of people weren't watching any of the news updates that took place over the weekend following the justice's death. Couple of things, because we're going to be talking a lot of state politics here in this hour of the program. Just a few things that I happened to come across before I hit air this morning that I wanted to quickly share with you. This comes out of the Idaho Press Tribune, out of Nampa. Representative Cheney introduces sexting legislation. Now, what are we talking about? Well, he says that there are young people currently in the state. You're talking about 15, 16-year-olds who have bad judgment sometimes. If you were ever 15 or 16 years old, I'm sure you know exactly what we're talking about. You make some decisions that aren't very mature when you're that age. And he says we need to make sure that we have a dividing line, that we delineate between what's a felony and what's a misdemeanor. And he doesn't believe that a 15 or 16-year-old should have a conviction and be listed as a sexual offender because of one mistake they make, sending a tweet, if you will, or rather a text, if you will, that is considered to be a little bit too much on the racy side. So he has brought that up in Idaho as well this year, and that could become a change in law. And then a couple of other things I found on the AP wire this morning. This one, legislators moving forward with a measure that would ban local governments from increasing the minimum wage. The measure must now clear the House and Senate floors. And then I moved down the page a bit, and this one really caught me by surprise. An Idaho House panel has spiked the funding proposal to Governor Otter's proposed alternative to Medicaid expansion. The decision effectively kills the governor's plan to provide basic health services to 78,000 Idahoans who make too much to qualify for Medicaid, but also don't qualify for health insurance subsidies. Now, on that note, since the guests are here a little early today, and they have some expertise on some of these issues, especially institutional knowledge that the host of the show does not yet have. I'd like to bring up perhaps to the both of them. And Randy, you can grab this mic here. We'll have Steve over there. We're all, I think, somewhat close enough in that situation. Steve can loan you a chair, too, if he likes. Randy may choose to stand during the program. So, but hey, right off the top, we had talked about this Medicaid expansion. And all of a sudden, this caught me by surprise this morning when I happened to see it on the AP wire. What's your take?
Well, certainly the governor has had his own proposal for that, and I think it's not going to be the end of the discussion. There's going to be more coming up on this because there are simply a lot of people who are pretty deeply affected.
We have had this discussion, I know, among all of us at one point or another, and the two of you have coffee when you're not on the air with me. So, but that this is proof positive that because we are so overwhelmingly a Republican state, that you have differences that come up between Republicans that you normally wouldn't see, I guess, in some other states. So you've got an opposition within the Republican Party, and this is a clear sign of it.
It really is, and I think it's there's a great deal of concern on the part of the Republican legislators that this problem be solved. They make too much money to qualify for the totally freebie programs, but not quite enough money in form of wages and salaries to get onto the other program. So there's a great big gap in the middle in here created. Thank you, Mr. Obama. There's a gap created in the middle here where we don't have enough and then we have too much. And it's a huge problem, and it's not going to go away. I think one of the key things that killed this particular bill was that it did not have the appropriate funding mechanism attached to it. And so now, we're the middle of February here, and the guys, everybody over there wants to be done and go home by the 15th of March because it's campaign year, blah, blah, blah. So now we're getting down to the nitty gritty of where we're going to pay, how are we going to pay for all this stuff? And I think in the next few days, maybe even by the end of the week, we will see proposals surface again in conjunction with this CCAP, I think it's called, to where they can get the necessary funding to fill this hole in the middle in here. It's far too big an issue to just, drop off the face of the earth.
And Randy, we'll bounce that one by you too as well, because I think we had this conversation last year. The governor had been proposing for half a dozen years an increase for the transportation fund, and he essentially threw it into the laps of the legislature and said, all right, you take care of it. And maybe that's what he's looking to do now with this, saying this is the best solution, but if you can't agree with the funding it, you've got to come up with your own idea.
And I think he'd be amenable to a variety of options as far as that goes. And it may be somewhat significant that right about now is the time that the actual budgeting gets underway. We've had, up to this point in the session, all the agencies and various other people give their proposals for the budget, what they would like to see. But now the budget committee is just about to get active in terms of deciding, okay, here's exactly how much money we think ought to go into all these various things, and here's where it should come from. And that process is just getting underway, and it continues up into within the last couple of weeks of the session. So we're just now getting into that, and this is really, in that sense, kind of the right time to address all of that, particularly if you're talking about some kind of a new effort that hasn't been there before.
We have a note, too, to make about this, and that this is the sheet from AP. But looking this over this morning, and this is their short little radio paragraphs, but the news minutes that they issue, 3 out of these 4 stories happen to deal with legislative issues, which shows you that there is that mad scramble for the door because of the election year.
It always gets busier in this way toward the end. It always gets way too busy, really, to the point that by the end of the session, they're racing so many bills through that they barely have time to consider them. It's been that way for decades.
And that seems to be a very common occurrence with legislatures. They wait till the very last minute. That's not a good thing in whole, but it's just the way things work. And I know my conversations with Representative Maxine Bell, she's co-chair of JFAC. It distresses her somewhat that everybody wants to push it till the last minute, and then you get into this big fist fight of push and shove, and you don't always end up with the best possible solutions.
What you sometimes wind up with is people getting mad at each other, and it can slow the session down, ironically, because somebody gets mad, they decide that they're going to play procedural games with something or another, and the decisions that wind up getting made aren't always done for the best reasons.
And typically you will see the chairmen of the various committees begin to exercise their power, because this comes through my committee and I don't like the way it's built, and so I'm going to table this one. But this one here, we're going to have a vote on it and send it to the floor. Well, the one that they tabled is the one that's really probably the most important, and so they need to get everybody in and let's talk about this thing and figure out what's wrong.
I think that in many states, and in Idaho's probably no different. I've worked in 3 others, and we would get to these crunch time periods, and what would happen is the leadership would essentially, a bill would come to the floor, and it's almost a thumbs up or a thumbs down, and everyone is expected to follow the leadership in voting yes or no on these particular items, because a lot of people haven't had the time to look through them.
It often goes that way. That's atypical scenario, but it kind of depends to a degree on what it is. With certain topics that hit home emotionally in the right way, you can have the caucus just break from leadership. Oh no, we're not doing that. Yep. Because they do see, among other things, they do see an election coming right around the bend.
See, I'm not a complete advocate of expanding, especially federal government services. But at the same time, all you have to do is see people in various states of distress over health issues, and it really tugs at your heartstrings. Well, we got all these legislators that are going to have to go home and explain this and to the voters. And this year, more than I can remember in my experience, we have got a tremendous amount of angst amongst the voters. Just look at the presidential stuff. People are angry. So you want to be real careful about how much of this stuff you just throw in the wastebasket.
But that anger does not, and Randy and I have been talking about this too as well, and I think we've come up on this as well, Steve, a couple of times, that it may be a national anger this year, but there are very few challenges going on. I had one guest on yesterday challenging in 23A, but to my knowledge, there aren't a whole lot of these going on this year.
So far, we haven't seen a lot of election challenges, and that's always kind of bothersome to me. Let's get real here. We need to have one of the things that the process is that we become an involved and informed electorate. And we recognize that the various people seeking office, we demand positions and answers, and for some reason that doesn't seem to be happening.
Well, that's the way it's supposed to work. Certainly,
that's right.
I mean, that's
the theory.
That's the theory.
Right.
That's how it should work, and a lot of it comes back and depends on the voters, on the voting population to get involved, to ask the questions, and to hold people accountable. I can recall times when legislators have gotten tossed out because of their stands on various issues. I can remember it's been decades now, but maybe you remember back in the 70s, there were legislators who were recalled by the voters.
That's right.
That happened a few times back in the early 70s. Hasn't happened since. Less and less, I think, over time, are people actively holding their legislators accountable in Idaho and probably in a lot of other places.
Yeah, I was
too.
going to say we're not just exclusive in that arena.
Yeah.
But it's unfortunate that we're also there, and are all of our elected officials, the legislatures, are they all doing such a fantastic job that nobody wants to challenge them? Nobody wants to get into the fray?
I don't think people are that happy with the legislature. On the one hand, on the other hand, it takes more effort. You hear a lot about the president and the people and a handful of people at the top, but you don't tend to know as much about what is your legislator doing, what is your city council member or county commissioner doing. People don't tend to know or follow that as closely, and they really should.
We have a break coming up. We'll get back to this conversation with both Steve Millington and Randy Stapilus in studio with us this morning. And that's an interesting point because a writer named Bill Curry this morning at Salon was talking about what happened in New Hampshire last week. And he said, you can't excuse it because he's a neighboring senator. He said, go ahead and ask your neighbors in your own hometown who the senator is from the next state. And again, if two-thirds of them, one-third don't know who Justice Scalia was, most likely they don't know names of senators from Washington, Oregon, Utah, Montana. So there's a good point to be made there. 20 minutes after 8 o'clock, we have 41. Warm morning to start. Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. A couple of guests in the studio with us this hour, and in fact, going to be a busy morning around here. Grant Lobes is coming up between 9 and 10 o'clock. He makes a monthly visit with us. Of course, our prosecutor will be talking today about what's going to happen with the Supreme Court. He has some experience on Capitol Hill. In fact, he was telling us a story, I think the last time he was here, about being at an event and standing outside the Capitol and chatting with somebody in the crowd, and then turned around and realized it was William Rehnquist. So the Supreme Court is just across the plaza from the Capitol building, so he may have some insight into all of that. It's 8:24:43, and you're listening to Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. Steve Millington is the chairman of the Twin Falls County Republican Party. Randy Stapilus is the man behind Idaho Weekly Briefing. And as long as you're here, you might as well mention again the website.
Okay. It is www.ridenbaugh.com. RIDENBAUGH.
Like the canal.
Just like the canal.
We can remember that. The three of us have been having some conversations. Go ahead.
Do I get I've got to put my 2 bits worth in. On Saturday night of this week at the Canyon Crest Event Center, the Twin Falls County Republicans will hold their annual Lincoln Day banquet. Social hour at 6, dinner at 7. Tickets are available. Go to twinfallsrepublicans.com or call me or call Chanel Dixon. We have some seats left. We got a big crowd. Senator Crapo, Congressman Mike Simpson, Governor Otter, Lieutenant Governor Brad Little. Oh, dear. I just had a Rick Perry moment. I'm done. My career is over. We know that we've got Brandon Wolf and Ron Crane. Lawrence Wasden is an old Twin Falls native, and he always makes a point to show up. We know that we'll have all three of the legislators from 23, three of them from 24 and 25. We normally get Steve Miller from 26. We will have our state party chairman, Steve Yates, will be here. We're going to have a good, big crowd. Great opportunity to meet and mingle and talk politics. Saturday night, Canyon Crest Event Center. Tickets are $50. Come and enjoy a great evening with us.
It sounds like your very own capital for a day.
Capital for a day. That's exactly right. And our keynote speaker this year will be Senator Crapel.
You just don't hope that the center tips over the canyon that night.
Yeah,
because
that's
there
right.
won't be any government left next week. We're actually talking a little bit today, too, as well. And Randy wrote about this in his column over the weekend, that there doesn't seem to be, and maybe in past presidential elections, the state party was really behind a particular candidate. And Mitt Romney, I think, made sense because of some regional ties. But by golly, this year, we don't really have any cohesion among the Republican establishment with any particular candidate.
Not yet.
Not so far as I can see. There was a column out, I think just this morning, that Chuck Malloy, who's a longtime political observer, wrote, which he got back in touch with Jim Risch, the senator who has been backing Marco Rubio, and he delivered a full-throated support statement for Rubio and said, don't count him out yet, which I think it'd be foolish to count him out at this point. It's hard to say exactly how things will go. But this is a little bit unusual. Most election years, by this stage in the process, I think most of Idaho's Republican establishment is maybe with a few exceptions pretty much on board with one candidate. It would have been Romney last time. George W. Bush got a lot of support earlier on, and I think it's kind of gone that way for a lot of years, but not this time.
And I think part of I don't know. I sit and stew and fuss over I think maybe part of the problem is that we don't have a real definitive leader in the Republican presidential runoff.
Or the leader is somebody that people are holding their nose at.
That's holding their nose. But the thing we're still seeing is that we do not have one Republican yet who has gone beyond that 50% threshold. And so even though Donald Trump has a good solid base down here, seems to be in the 30-35 range everywhere he goes, he can't break through that top tier. Did he get 42% in New Hampshire? Did I get that right? I think it was close to 42% of the votes in New Hampshire. But he can't break the 50% barrier.
Or at least he hasn't yet.
Not yet.
I mean, there were a lot of people who said that he had a 25 or 30% barrier and he could not go beyond that. I saw a lot of analysts a few months ago saying that.
Yes, that's exactly right. In the late fall, early winter cycle, everybody said he can never get beyond this point, period. Well, he has now escaped that perceived barrier and is moving forward.
How much higher can he go?
And I think if we had somebody who was really dominating the race, that you'd see a lot more people committed. And you take somebody like Senator Risch backing Marco Rubio, a long shot, perhaps, but Rubio says a lot of good things, and he seems to be somewhat resilient. He's hanging right in there against Donald Trump's bluster.
Well, hold those thoughts. A bluster is probably there's a statement everyone probably, even if you support Trump, you can understand. It's 8:41 right now. We have Steve Millington and Randy Stapilus in studio with us this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Keep in mind, of course, they can take some of your telephone calls as well. Coming up following the break at 736-0300. That's 736-0300. We have a couple of guests in the studio with us this hour on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Steve Millington is the chairman of the Twin Falls County Republican Party. Randy Stapilus joining us from Idaho Weekly Briefing. And, of course, Bill Colley on Top Story this morning. I do want to remind you of our friends at Tint Lady. We've been telling you that the weather is going to be getting warmer. Well, there's a few hints of it this week and next week. Temperatures some days in the 50s. But when we get into that really hot weather, keep in mind that if you've got a lot of windows in your home or business, that those things end up being like convection ovens. Well, you can reduce the heat by up to 72% with window tints. And we recommend that you give Tint Lady a call for a free estimate at 736-8469 or go online, tintladyidaho.com. Locally owned and operated, in business over 20 years. 1887 Highland Avenue East in Twin Falls, open Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. And remember, don't squint, get tint. We have been talking a little bit about the upcoming, it's now 3 week away, right? Presidential primary here.
Yeah, ours is March 8th.
That's the Republican,
That's
because
Republican.
the Democrat caucus
The
is
Democrat
later.
caucus is the 22nd. And the Democrats are supposed to announce, they may have already done, they were going to announce by today the locations of the various caucus events in the state of Idaho. Of course, the Republicans are having the election, and so that will be held.
They keep you up to speed on that, right?
The Democrats do. They go out of their way to see to it I know everything. So even in Idaho, we still have this thing. We've got 13 names on that ballot, and all those 4 of them have withdrawn at this point already. Their names still are on the ballot, because the ballots were printed as of the date of completion of the filing. So we got 13 names on there. Only 4 of them, obviously, are no longer candidates. They have suspended, I think is the word they use, suspended their candidacy.
Technically, in purely technical sense, they haven't withdrawn. You're right. The word they use is suspended, basically so that they can keep on raising money to pay off their debts and do things like that.
Okay.
Essentially, their campaigns are over, and everybody knows that. But technically, not quite yet.
Okay.
Technically. So,
So
Jim Gilmore will be jumping back in any day.
and he'll pick up his 2 votes out of Idaho.
right, yeah.
Will Nevada be somewhat of an indicator about how things will go in Idaho?
You know, I don't know that Idaho is tied that closely to Nevada. We'd like to think of them as our next door neighbor, which they are, but I'm not sure that anything that the Nevada situation is not going to really play heavily against the Idaho election. Now, I haven't heard. I know there's a whole slew of southern states that are going to have election on March 1. And then we're on the 8th, and then another batch hit on March 15. I don't know who else is on the docket for March 8th. I frankly haven't paid any attention because I've been worried about Idaho. So if by chance the Idaho should be the only one on that March 8th date, we could see some folks wander through here and say hi.
I can't recall which states they are, but Idaho is I think one of 3 or 4.
It seems like to me I remembered more than one.
Yeah. But Nevada, just to go back to that point real quick, their politics and and the makeup of the people in Nevada is just a lot different from Idaho. I mean, in Nevada, the state is pretty closely balanced between Democrats and Republicans, for one thing. Their legislature, a lot of their offices go back and forth. They often have one Democrat and one Republican representing them in the Senate, as they do
right now.
Yeah,
I think.
yeah.
See? And I think their governor down there is also a Republican.
He's a Republican.
And
yes.
and so they are kind of,
You've got a massive urban center too, which we don't really have in that sense.
Yes, and it really dominates the state's votes. So it's a very different kind of situation. I wouldn't draw too many conclusions at all for Idaho from what happens in Nevada. Although what happens in Nevada will be very interesting for other reasons.
Oh yeah, a lot of interesting points.
Why is it that, and I mentioned this I think to Randy yesterday, why is it that we have a lot of those old Rand Paul supporters, and they were his father's supporters too, I'm finding that they're breaking for Trump now, which catches me a little bit by surprise.
Me too. The Rand Paul group was very definitive and very highly defined in their ideological position, and I have a tough time translating that into Donald Trump. Donald Trump is extremely anti-establishment and anti-media, and I'm going to show these guys by criminy we don't have to do this, blah, blah, blah. Ron Paul was one of these people that, the federal government is on a runaway. We need to take control and shut it down. Rand Paul, same kind of ideology, although he was more in the isolationist sphere than his father was, or at least it came across a lot more this go round. And if Rand Paul had got off of that wagon altogether and just said, look, we got to balance our budget, we've got to create more jobs, he would still be there.
We're going to have a short break. Can you hold that thought?
Sure.
Randy Stapilus joining us, as well as Steve Millington in studio this morning. 41 at 8:40. Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Our guest joining us in studio this morning, offering us some thoughts on the political race, especially that coming up in 3 weeks we have a Republican primary in Idaho. And the fact of the matter is that the state Republicans could well be described as being all over the political map when it comes to backing particular candidates. Steve Millington from the Twin Falls County Republican Party, Randy Stapilus from Idaho Weekly Briefing, both of them joining me, Bill Colley, in studio on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And Randy had a follow-up to our conversation about the Paul backers somehow transferring their allegiance to Donald Trump.
It's what makes it kind of interesting if you compare it to anything like the traditional Republican politics that we've had, is that while the Pauls, both father and son, have a very clear and pretty much shared political ideology, political philosophy that's pretty easily described, it's libertarian for the most part. Donald Trump, on the other hand, is almost kind of the anti-ideology candidate. There is not any kind of a common thread that runs through the various positions that he's taken on. And if you listen to his speech, the only real common thread is himself. There's not really too much there. So what's the common denominator that would cause the Paul supporters to support Donald Trump? I think that's a real interesting question, and maybe that goes to what really is motivating people when you get down to the brass tacks. Maybe the ideology wasn't the thing that was motivating people at all. Maybe there was some other component that was going on.
That's interesting. How would we define that component, Randy? And as we go forward for the next 60 days, and the race is, well, in all likelihood, could be over in 60 days. How is that? We don't seem to be able to put our finger on one point and say all of these people are going to rally around this issue, and therefore this is where I want to be.
There's a lot of talk about how angry the electorate is and how disaffected a lot of the electorate is, and maybe that's somewhere near it. There's a lot of concern, even fear that's out there on the part of a lot of people. But I think that this is something that a lot of people who watch politics like you and I are in the process of trying to define and trying to get a better handle on. I don't think that I have a great handle on it yet, but I'm trying to find out and figure out what I can about what is driving so many people in this election year that's different from what we've seen in most previous election years, and it's a lot different in a lot of ways.
Much different than we've seen in the last 4 or 5 elections, at least.
No, we've seen with Paul pulling out of the race. He had the major endorsement from Raul Labrador. No, I never really go on anybody's endorsement. I pretty much made up my mind in advance, and an endorsement I don't think has ever influenced my vote. But Labrador, when he was on the program with us a couple of weeks ago, couldn't commit to a new candidate yet. The governor, who I understand is a close friend of John Kasich's, the governor is not committed, even though he's attended a fundraiser, as I understand, for Kasich. Why is some of the people are waiting to see which way the wind blows?
That's an interesting question. I'm not sure that I have a good answer for that. I look at for example, Senator Crapo has not committed. Neither has Mike Simpson, Congressman Mike Simpson. Neither one committed. They both are up for re-election this year, and it could be that they're just going to play their cards a little bit close to their vest until it gets farther along in the process, rather than go too far out on a limb and wake up one morning and say, "Oh boy, that was not my best deal."
I think that part of it too may be that it's a more unpredictable season than most of these presidential primaries have been. Mostly, especially on the Republican side, it's been fairly clear from early on who had a pretty good shot at getting the nomination and who did not. This year, it's a little bit more difficult to tell. There are different kinds of factors involved, and if you're a major elected official like a governor or senator and you choose wrong, there could be consequences to pay with the person who actually does get the nomination and maybe becomes president down the road. These people do have memories.
And that, you look at a Crapo. He has been in the Senate. I think this is his 18th year. And so next year, if we should be fortunate enough to get a Republican president, I hope, and the Senate stays Republican and the House stays Republican, Crapo, with his term and his the positions he has, the various assignments in the Senate, he's going to be in a real position of providing significant leadership in there.
Hold that thought for a moment. I just want to mention for those folks who are listening this morning, and I've been telling people this for several months, if you're having difficulty listening to the program, we recommend that you give a call to Dr. Christine Pickup, a doctor of audiology at Mount Harrison Audiology in Rupert. She's at 1218 9th Street, Unit number 2. Telephone number 208-312-0957. That's MountHarrisonAudiology.com online. And did you know that the health of the inner ear is affected by your cardiovascular and kidney health? The inner ear is very sensitive to changes in your blood supply. If you've had recent heart problems or kidney problems, you should have your hearing checked and have it checked right away. It's 8:49, coming up on 8:50-44. Randy Stapilus and Steve Millington joining me, Bill Colley, on Top Story this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX and NewsRadio1310.com. It looks like we're on our way to 50 again this morning and should get there shortly. For the two of you, I mean, when you're hearing all of this going on, and Randy, you mentioned the fact that there are consequences. Somebody gets their feelings hurt early on, but on the other hand, if you're a close friend of one of those candidates and you don't back that candidate, and you may have been the best of buddies in Washington, it's going to cause some problems there too, I would imagine.
Oh, the consequences can run in both directions. The failure to endorse somebody that was expecting your endorsement, I mean, that can be there too. It can cut in both directions.
And that makes it really difficult for the individual who would be expected to make an endorsement. How do I satisfy both sides of that? How can I walk down both sides of the road here and not make too many enemies or lose my friends? I have a good friend who gave me a statement some time back that I try to remember, and it is, don't make it hard for me to be your friend.
We are 3 weeks away from that Republican primary. So here's the question. Any predictions on who you see coming out on top? There's a lot can happen, obviously, in 21 days, but who's going to be our Republican choice out of Idaho? This is not an endorsement. This is just
a guess.
Right.
Anything I can and say will not be used against me in a court of law. I think that Trump is still going to have a strong following. I would see Rubio playing well in Idaho. He has been here, visited here several times, and so I would see him playing well. I do know that Senator Ted Cruz's father, I think the first name is Raphael, I'm not sure, don't quote me on that. His father is going to participate in a Lincoln Day celebration in Idaho Falls, Idaho. It's just prior to our election. So it's between the 25th and the first day or two of March that they have their Lincoln Day over in Idaho Falls, and they're pushing that real hard. Now, I have not heard yet of anybody else who is planning to make a push into Idaho, but I think we could narrow it down to those. I don't see John Kasich doing well here. Not enough name recognition. Not much of a campaign organization. Ben Carson is done for all intents and purposes, I really liked George W. Bush, still do, and he made good decisions based on the information he had, and as further events unfolded, they proved to be very difficult decisions.
Or Jeb, you mean?
No, I'm talking George W. But I'm not a big fan of Jeb. And I don't know why. I just can't get the enthusiasm. I just can't get the fire.
Maybe it's his lack of enthusiasm.
I don't know what it is. He just doesn't light my fire.
Randy.
It's I think that what Idaho does is, well, first of all, it's going to be depending a lot on what happens nationally, because there will probably be at least one or more candidates that'll be dropping out, and that'll have an effect on something. Does something that Trump or Cruz or maybe Rubio say that just blows them up, or right now Rubio's still in kind of a tough spot because of the debate problems that he had, but that was the debate before last. Are people still bearing that in mind? It's very hard to know. My best guess right now, as it sits, is that probably either Trump or Cruz winds up with the largest number of Idaho votes, but it's hard to say.
We've got a caller with us, and caller, you're on the air with Randy, Steve, and Bill at 8:53.
Good morning. Well, the reason everybody, the voters are really angry and upset is because the Republican establishment, there's been no pushback, and this is why Trump is way out in the front, because he's a non-establishment candidate, and the neocons who basically run the establishment Republican Party seem to get along with whatever Obama wants. And as far as the budgets and so forth, I mean, there was no pushback to stop the EPA, to stop the funding of illegal immigration and amnesty and so forth. And people are very upset with this because there's a lot of people, including some of my friends, that are out of work because they're having to compete with this low-cost labor. Why is nobody taking on Simpson? Because it costs a lot of money, number one. And the U.S. Chamber of Commerce will come in here and just flood the commercial waves with, pro-Simpson.
Well, hold that thought, caller, because we were just talking about the angst people have over jobs and competition during the break, the commercial break, and I think he brings up that point is what's really driving the anger.
There are a lot of all the things that he's talking about here. There are a lot of good reasons for people to be angry or to be very concerned about the way things are going in a lot of directions. There's a real solid basis for that, and what a lot of people see in their lives. It's
real.
There's certainly no fantasy in that.
Yeah, the guy down
real.
the street lost his job last week, or my kid just graduated from college and he can't get a decent job, and so it's a big issue. It's a big point. It's not going to go away.
So then comes the question of what do you do about that? How do you fix this?
Well, and that's an interesting point, Randy, because so many times as I've watched all these debates, and I'll stand up and say, well, why don't you tell me exactly what you're going to do to fix it? And nobody ever goes there. And maybe it's too early in this campaign process to play all your cards.
I don't think it's ever too early to answer a basic question like that.
We've got about a minute and a half left. I'm going with the Democrat caucus later in the month. I think that will go easily to Hillary Clinton in Idaho. Any other thoughts on that?
No, she'll take Idaho, I think.
Probably, but I've talked with a couple of Democrats who hear a lot of enthusiasm for Bernie Sanders internally, and there may be a lot of Idaho Democrats who think, in Idaho, why not?
Yeah, let's give it a try.
Well, we could be reaching that point where developments in South Carolina and Nevada have a great influence on that.
More than we can see today.
We could.
Have we got just 1 minute?
Sure.
We need to explain why our good friend Randy Stapilus is actually with us in Twin Falls today. He has published an interesting book called Crossing the Snake, and he will be at the Twin Falls Visitor Center, the Chamber of Commerce Visiting Center out by the Perrine Bridge, from noon until
about noon to 1, roughly.
In that time frame.
Yeah.
Got a wonderful book here of his thoughts and comments and ideas and stories involving political things in the state of Idaho. A great read. If you get a chance, folks, go out to the Visitor Center at the Perrine Bridge and visit with Randy and pick up one of his books.
I was going to say, Randy will sit there on the stagecoach just signing away.
That would be nice. This is the first time Randy and I have had face-to-face in a long time. We visited a couple of times over in his hometown and some interesting conversations. He's got a good, thoughtful insight.
Well, let's figure we might want to do this again sometime.
Oh, it was fun.
Yes,
I'd
like to do it again.
Yeah.
We've got a break coming up for news at 9 o'clock from Fox. I want to thank Randy Stapilus for dropping by. The website again is
www.ridenbaugh.com.
And Steve, you've got a website too.
TwinFallsRepublicans.com.
There you go. That's fairly simple to follow.
Yeah, that's real easy. And don't forget our Lincoln Day, Saturday night.
It's 8:58, and we've got a break, as I said, for news from Fox. Also, Grant Loeb's joining us in the next hour. And, of course, we'll be talking a little news about the Supreme Court. That's on the way.